Are you looking for valuable business advice to reach that 7-figure revenue mark? Do you want actionable tips to properly navigate through every business challenge you encounter along the way? Let Tersh Blissett and Josh Crouch be your guide in getting you to the top here at Service Business Mastery. Tune in as they sit down with world-renowned authors in business, leadership, and personal growth who share valuable insights about management, marketing, pricing, human resources, and so much more. Let their nuggets of wisdom gold guide you in owning a thriving, profitable, and ever-growing business. Here are your hosts, Tersh and Josh.
What's up, everybody out there in podcast world? I'm super excited today. My buddy Eddie McFarlane is here with us, and we're going to talk. This guy is a wealth of knowledge, and if you don't know who he is, he has this luscious locks of hair that Josh and
I can't stop staring at it.
I know we're so
even his Facebook avatar. You know how they have those avatars on Facebook? His Facebook avatar looks freaking awesome.
Oh yeah,
mine's like I got to put a hat on for mine.
Yeah, we're going to talk about training. So Eddie, he's got a ton of background with training. He's just got a whole gamut of background when it comes to the HVAC business with Haller Enterprises and then Schedule Engine. And so he's a founder at Schedule Engine. If you've ever heard about that, if you haven't heard about Schedule Engine, check it out. We use it personally within Service Emperor and love the product. It's amazing. And then he's on the board for ACA and on the board for NATE. He's all about some training, and he's all about, he's ate up with our industry. So I'm super excited to talk to him today. And Josh, you got anything else before I bring this fellow in here?
No, let's do it. He's the best looking of the three of us. So
hey, how are you guys?
Welcome to the show, Eddie.
Hey, I'm going to have you guys follow me around and do my intros everywhere. That was awesome. I'm going to book you for Thanksgiving here. That was pretty sweet. Thank you very much. You're very kind.
So for those who don't know who you are, they've been living under a rock. Can you do a brief introduction? And brief, you can do like a 20-minute introduction, because I know that's to fit it all in there, because you got a lot of stuff going on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and hey to everyone in the audience. Yeah, so the headline is I'm the luckiest guy in the home service industry, right? That's my job. I just get to work every day in areas to help like all the men and women in the blue collar trades that are taking care of our communities and families every day. So I do that in a couple of different ways. I've had an incredible privilege for the last 15 years to be on the team at Haller Enterprise, which is a mechanical company in central Pennsylvania, sort of between Harrisburg and Philly, 4 locations, 400 team members, just taking care of people every day. And they do plumbing, heating, electrical. They do, commercial construction, and so that's been my proving ground, and that team has been incredibly gracious. And when you think of like words like expert, I always like the I don't know if you guys have heard it. It's that Neil Bohr's. He's a physicist, Nobel winning physicist, and he says an expert is just someone that's made all the mistakes possible in a very narrow field. And the team at Haller can tell you that, because I can tell you, I sucked at training when I first started, and so they can testify to that, and they've been very kind to letting me be part of that team there. And then a number of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I had the pleasure, Austin Haller, founder of Schedule Engine, to work with him at solving contractors' problems, booking more calls with less headaches, right? So all things there. They've got an incredible suite of services, technology and life services. So he drives that bus every day. And then I get to volunteer. I get to serve. So I get to work with the team at ACA, Air Conditioning Contractors of America. They literally wrote the book. It's a real page turner. If you've sized an air conditioner, you've used it. If you've ran a maintenance, they wrote the book on it, and it's so they're the guardians of a trade that has treated me very, very well. And then last number of years, I've also been working with the NATE board, so I get to work with the men and women there, as well as executives from distributors and manufacturers, and that's a testing and accreditation nonprofit that's seeking to elevate the trades. And when you look at the common thread is I'm incredibly privileged, and I get to give back every day. specifically around helping people. I think if we make people's jobs easier, we make their lives easier, right?
Yeah.
Spend a lot of time working, and so that's me. As Sagittarius, like long walks on the beach. Yeah.
That's what's up. And you're from Pennsylvania, originally born and raised?
No, I'm born and raised in Scotland. So tremendously proud to be Scottish, but I fell in love, and that person, my wife, was very American, and so I get to be in sort of Pennsylvania's sort of heart of the Amish land in Lancaster County. It's a beautiful place to live every day. Again, very lucky. We're minutes away from big cities, and yet we could be minutes away in the country, and so really fortunate. My family wigs out every time they come, and they're like, "That's a horse and buggy. It's 2021." I'm like, I know. It's fine. It's fine. It's a bit of a culture shock when you coming from Glasgow, but it's you do. Surprisingly, you do. So yeah, that's I born and raised, came over when I was 21, and been in the trades here 20 years ago. So I'm the non-traditional person that enters the trades. I'm what everybody is looking for, is like that I'm the byproduct and passionate because of I was recruited out of an industry. I wasn't the kid that took the toaster apart. I didn't build a hot rod with my dad. I didn't go to Votech. I didn't go to a career institute, but I managed to have an incredibly fulfilling and wonderful career in the trades, and that's the secret, as Jerry says.
Yeah.
So how long have you been training other technicians? When did that start?
Yeah, honestly, within a year or two of being actually in the trades, and it's an interesting concept, because it's one of the first fallacies that we see in training is that the person doing the training has to be the person that knows the most.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
that's
really,
what we hear.
Absolutely.
Training isn't really about knowing the most. It's like who can impart the most information effectively. And so when you think about it, we all had that substitute teacher, and as a kid you think they knew everything, and you know, as you grow up you realize they were just a page ahead of you in the book. So I was that person, and because what they wanted to convey was the excitement for the trades and so quite early on I would get the ride-alongs, not long enough to teach them anything bad. Like as soon as it didn't take me long to teach everybody something I knew, but from very early on I was really privileged to be able to share my passion with the trades. And so they would put me with a new person for a couple of weeks, and then they would go work with one of our master tradesmen to learn more of the in-depth stuff. So it's been going, and obviously as I've continued in the trades I've learned more and been able to share more.
Well, I feel like part of sometimes we get bogged down in the weeds. Now, I'm not taking anything away from the guys who are super knowledgeable in our industry. You know, your Brian Orrs and Jim Bergman and Bill Spohn. I mean, those guys, they know so much about our industry. But and these guys even fit into what I'm about to say, but a lot of times it's the person who conveys the message the best.
Right.
So like like Jerry Rollins telling stories and yourself. So for me, like there's things where I've said multiple times, like I'll do like a company-wide training with the technicians and our service experts, and then I'll do it again and I'll do it again. And then I'll send them a video that Brian Orr did with HVAC School podcast. And they're like, "Oh, this makes so much sense." I was like, "I've literally told you that like 10 times now."
I have had that. I've had that. And so what's interesting is there's a couple of mantras that we live by. One is when the student's ready, the lesson appears, right? That's just a fact of life and how knowledge is, and pedagogy and the art of learning and stuff. And the other is, you know, if the student hasn't learned, the teacher hasn't taught, and those are important principles for training. But sometimes people need to hear things. I liken it to when you go to a different country, you don't help those people that speak a different language by just saying it again or louder
or louder.
No, like you have to understand how they learn, and then try and convey in that way. And so that's actually like, once you get past, you've had a little bit of experience, because there's all kinds of traps that you fall in, performance mode, like needing a certain something back from the room, and there's those sort of traps that we all fall into. But once you learn that really your role as the instructor is to understand how the student can likes to learn, and try, or even the phraseology, for lack of a better term, and that's why storytelling is so good, and Jerry's so good, because it's not really about impressing people and with how much you know. It's about getting them to understand what you understand, so in the same situation they would do the same thing you would do. And by the way, that goes for homeowners, customers, as well as, you know, quote quote students.
So with that being said, what you just said there, how do I teach a technician to do it my way versus the way they've always done it? Because the fear that I have is that, you know, you hire a technician who has 20, 25 years experience, but they have, like, it's beer can cold, like, you know, and I want subcool and superheat, you know.
Vacuum for 3 cigarettes. I got you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
No. So here's the thing. How do we like to learn, and what do we retain? Do we retain more things that we're lectured at us, or things that we were instructed in, or do we retain things for a lifetime that we discovered for ourselves? So one of the things that we focus a lot on is the power of self-discovery. And so most of our training sessions start with a conversation about, like, hey, tell me why you think this is important, and tell me, I don't know, and there's no right or wrong answer, because you can't push a rope, right? Like, learning is like a rope. You can lead it, but you can't push it. And so you need to understand the idea that people discover things from themselves, and questions are your biggest tool. So when you get the question, then you can ask more questions. And so a great example of this is, because we talk about this, actually we have a toolshed episode we're going to do about it, is I pulled out, when you think about how we learn, analogies and tools and things like that are helpful, right? So I pulled out a 6-pack of soda, because it's corporate and I couldn't bring beer, but we talk about it, right? So, like, hey, picture a case of your favorite beverage. It's a hot day. This is the one you always get, and in this case, it was a Dr. Pepper. And so you pull out one, you have it. If you like it, you have another, and then you pull out one, and it's a Mountain Dew. Well, how would you feel? And everyone, like, when it's that ridiculous, everyone goes, "Well, I wouldn't be happy. That's not what I paid for." Yeah. And so then you just have a conversation. Okay, so what had to happen? Well, everybody had to go to the factory. They all had to agree how much would be in it, what would be in it, what it would be like, and you have this very sort of expansive conversation, and you can even push back and go, close enough. Fizzy water, both will give you diabetes, right? Like, what's the big deal? It's close enough. And after a while, the room's like, no, you're just being silly, Eddie. And I'm like, got it. Now let's think about how we learn. And typically that 25-year person, table stakes in the industry is like, if you didn't have your own tools, you would ride along. If you had your own tools, you were a lead, right? Like, we'll give you a van and you're a lead. And you've done zoning, great. We now did zoning, however he did it at his last place. And there's all of this institutional knowledge. So when you think about it, you break it down to something that they understand already, because knowledge is contiguous. It has to. We don't know things free floating. They have to bolt on to things that we already know. So they already know that would be ridiculous to have a mixed palette of beer or whatever. And they've discovered that for themselves. And then you talk about, well, what had to happen? And then you call out, now that everybody's there and not feeling threatened, you can say, so, there's probably somebody in the room that's like, relax, guys. I'm glad you're doing this for everybody else. Everybody else need this, but what you don't know about me is I worked at the Mountain Dew factory for 25 years. I'm pretty good. I'm glad these guys have the rules. Like, there's actually a picture of the wall at the Mountain Dew factory of me. And when you and everybody does exactly what you're doing, they laugh because they understand how foolish that is, right?
Yeah.
So now we've discovered why we have rules, who needs to follow the rules, what the output of the rules are, and what if we don't follow them, right? And so you can take this conversation to the nth degree and you say, okay, so if I work the Dr. Pepper hotline and I say, hey, I got half a case of Mountain Dew, I can say, sir, that's not possible because we have these processes and this is all the steps we go through. And if we don't have that, we can't. right? And so now and you help them understand it relative to things that they already know.
Holy
that are
cow.
very,
Like,
very simple.
It's like for me alone, and I'm thinking of myself, like I get the phone call that, hey, look, he didn't do X, Y, and Z. I'm like, well, look, I have in Service Titan, I had this form and it's completed, and he can't go any further until this form's completed. So I know that he had to have done that checklist. So then it turns into a different conversation. Now, if he didn't complete the form, figured out a way to bypass it,
Right.
and then it's a whole different conversation altogether.
So we call that getting a case of the checksies, where they just go down the form and check everything. It's like a Friday afternoon. The static
Pencil
pressure
whipping.
on all systems on a Friday afternoon is 0.5, right? The static pressure. It's amazing.
Oh yeah.
So you know, and so you know, Jim Collins' great quote is, you know, leaders confront the brutal facts. So we just talk about it. And we talk about, and I'm a big believer in adult conversations. Like, it's just the facts. I'll share my constraints with you, and when you use questions instead of telling people what to do. So throughout history, there's only ever been two outcomes to control: one, comply; two, defy. Right? And what determines which of those two choices to either comply or defy is the relative options. So 20 years ago, jobs were scarce, workers were plenty. You put up with a lot of stuff, right? Well, now, shoes on the other foot. And so you can't really just rely on control. So you have to have these better conversations and seek to understand before seeking to be understood, right? The great Stephen Covey talks about that all the time. And so help. And so now, instead of an adversarial, like, here was the rules, you've now broken the rules. Now you come alongside as a coach and say, hey, help me understand. Because remember, we talked about not being the crazy Mountain Dew guy, right? I just got off the phone with a customer, and can you help me understand what's changed? Did we miss something in that conversation? And usually from there, instead of this adversarial because I said so, you get into this sort of like, you know, and usually there's something going on at life, you know, getting a divorce, or like my kid's sick, or you're like, all right, I got it, but you understand, you got it. And it's just a much better outcome.
Yeah. So what would you say to, I mean, you mentioned the 20 years ago, the tables were turned.
Yeah.
What would you say now because back then you could say, you didn't have any, like your technician was almost held hostage, maybe employee was held hostage. What is the roles, I feel like, can almost reverse now?
Yeah. So 20 years ago, there was a labor shortage. That's why people like me were brought into the trades. The employees just didn't know it.
Yeah.
So nothing's really changed except
I got you.
Now they know it.
Oh yeah.
So and I'm a big believer in removing emotion as much as you can, right?
How do you do that, though? I was going to ask you that too. I mean, you're filling me up with a bunch of questions. How do you, like, this is my baby, and like, if they ruin a relationship with a client, or potentially ruin a relationship with a client, how do you not make that an emotionally charged conversation? I mean, I know how I do it, but
so so it's a combination of like having a punch bag in the gym. No,
I have one. It's right over there. So it's right out of camera.
You know, something we say in our house when my kids were growing up, they're like, hey, when can I do this? When can I do that? And the definition of adult in our house is the moment that you accept and understand that you and you alone are 100% responsible for where you find yourself.
I like that.
100%. The moment when you and you alone are responsible for where you find yourself. Now, does that mean we don't have obstacles? We could probably just do a whole thing on that, but it's a mindset. So I practice gratitude, I practice stoicism, and so I start with me. So what did I do to cause this? Where was I unclear? What did I allow to happen? Because remember, performance is just determined by the lowest level of performance you accept on a team. It's not what you say. It's that. So I start with myself. Right? Because that's what adults do. Then I ask myself practical questions like, well, last time I got emotional and had this conversation, how'd that work out for me? You know, and you understand that when you come at somebody's emotion as a parent ego state, You're just going to activate the child in that person. And we're all these different ego states. And they're like, well, yeah, well, you never did that. And I was like, well, I'm tired of it, right? And that's just super unproductive. And you know, you also factor in, it's like we keeping trucks clean and tucking shirts in, right? Like if that's in our code, employees know they're not going to get fired for that today. In a world where you're getting $3,000, $5,000 sign-on bonuses and you're spending 15 grand a month on Indeed, that's it. So why even pretend, right? So how do we if those things are important, how do we move to those? And so it's about understanding like what's ultimately effective, right? And so another Covey thing that comes to mind is we can be efficient with things, but we must be effective with people. And that's what training is all about. It's not about being quick, and it's about ultimately what is most effective. And if you really care about this baby, then you're going to subjugate your pride and your ego and your emotion, and you're going to focus on like what's going to get me the predictably best outcome. Easier said than done, right? Like, listen.
Yeah. It takes years to kind of for that thought process to be second nature. Yeah. Because my last question, and I'll let Josh, because I've been asking all the questions, but what do you ever find a technician or an employee teammate who needs the kind of shock factor of like getting kind of emotionally charged?
Yeah. So yes and no, but here's and related to training specifically. For years I was training and listen, I can turn a phrase, I can create an emotional arc, and like those are all techniques, right? I can talk real slow and like, and I've had people come up and say, and this is really profound and it was meaningful at the time, like, hey, I'm 52 and I just want you to know no one's ever explained things like that to me, and that was really, really powerful. But 2 weeks later, nothing's really changed. Yeah. So it's about like emotion. I find will get short-term buy-in, and this is a lot of the time. Like some people say, "Well, training doesn't work," right? And there's a whole process to understanding training, but it's really one of my rules is a meeting isn't training, and training is a meeting. You know, you've had training when something changes. So if there's no change, you didn't have a training session. You just had a meeting. You
just had a meeting,
right?
Everybody hung out together.
If you really understand, you're starting with the end in mind. You know what you're trying to do. You're going to have a training session. So yes, you can do that emotional shock factor, but then you're left with the fruit of the emotional tree, which
absolutely.
That's
once
like
that wears off, then and it's like it's gone.
And so to be clear, on the other side, I'm not singing kumbaya drum circles and like we're all like enlightened, self-actualized beings. There's consequences. There's performance metrics that need to be hit. We're a business, but I believe. So Brené Brown, she says, clarity is kindness. And I think that one thing more than anything is...
That's true. That is so true.
We try and do all these things because we think that's going to be kind. We say, well, this kind of person is this. So I'm going to say it like this. Or this person, if I push too hard, they're not going to like that. And then an unhappy tech won't perform. But at the end of the day, that's not our job. We're not inside anybody else's head. Our role is to be absolutely clear. So what is the game we're playing? What are the rules? How do you stay on the team? How do you score points? How long is the game? How long's left in the quarter? And listen, that's how we can be as kind as possible to our team, is by being very, very clear. Kind, but nurturing, but very, very clear. Like, hey, help me understand.
You don't have to be harsh about it. Right. Like the old school, like the mechanic and his helper. You don't have to
screaming at him.
Yeah,
listen, I've had tools thrown at me in a basement. And I get it, and it worked.
Yeah.
So much. And so, but in a world where people have choices and they care about training and they care about culture and they care about how they're treated and where they want to spend their time beyond the paycheck, all of a sudden things like this matter, right? And hear me, there's two sides. Training is a means to an end, but it's only ever designed as a function of achieving X, which is a meaningful methodology to achieve Y, which is usually a financial result, a customer retention result, an employee retention, and like there's a reason we do everything.
Okay, can I ask one more question?
Yeah, go from
Josh.
I don't
Sure,
know if
Chris, go
you're
ahead.
asking me, but sure.
I've kind of taken over. So this is something like, as a business owner, like this is where a constant, it's not a conflict. I love training. I love training my guys. But then I get asked this, and it brings up a great point. What happens if you train them and they leave? And then obviously, what happens if you don't train them and they stay?
Right.
Is the obvious response to that. But what happens if you spend the money and you spend the time and you're training people who have their picture on the wall at the Mountain Dew factory, or they just are, they're not retaining the knowledge? At some point, do you say, all right, you're just not invited to trainings anymore. You're a great parts getter, tool getter. You'll never be anything more than that. Like, is that something that we do, or we just keep training with them, keep training? And
so yeah, two questions, right? And I think you're talking about the Richard Branson quote, right? What happens if we look? Training is a cost of business. It should be built in like rags and caulk and fundamental stuff, right? It's just a cost. And I will tell you, this thing they don't talk about is, if you become a center of excellence for training technicians, you will get some people poached. That's just a fact. You're gonna invest the money. Your job is to reap the harvest for as long as they're with you, and wish them well as they go out the door. I believe if we focused on people's last day as much as we did their first, we'd have better results. But it's also the way.
What do you mean by that right there? What do you mean if you focus on the last day, the first day as much as the last?
Yeah.
Or the last day as much as the first.
So basically, if I think we've all done a lot of work at making sure we onboard employees well. Not everybody, but we've thought about that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, when someone moves on, they're like, "Well, you're dead to me, and I'm holding your last check." And you see all these questions. But what we forget is, 20 years ago when I left my last company, 15 years ago when I left them, listen, guys aren't like, "Hey, I'll call you Friday and we'll talk about our feelings." Like, that wasn't the world, and we weren't really texting everybody. But in a hyper-connected world, two things happen. One, the first question your current team is going to ask that new member is like, "Oh, you came from so-and-so. What's it like over there?" And remember that the way our mind works is we'll call, right? And we've all been somewhere. It's like that first month, we're like, "Oh, I'm not sure. I
don't know about this. Let's get."
And we had that. Back. What if you took everybody for lunch their last day and told them the door's always open? We appreciate everything you've done for us. I looked at the numbers, and you ran over 7,000 calls for us. I just want to thank you, like, because of you. And then we make a personal impact statement. I could do X, or my kids could do Y, and that was really cool. And look, you got to take care of your family. It's a different paradigm, crazy. Right?
Yeah, it is completely different. It's crazy because so a short story about a dispatcher that I had a while back. This has been a couple years ago. He actually was pretty much on board with me whenever I first started the business, and really helped out. But he was the announcer for the Savannah Bananas baseball team, and so like he had that announcer's voice, and I was like, oh yeah, perfect for the to pick up the phones and talk to people and dispatch. And his goal in life was always to run a radio station. He actually was from New Jersey. And then he went to California, just working DJs at different radio stations, and he wanted to run one. And he had the opportunity to move about an hour and a half away and would run 3 stations. And he mentioned it because he was in a conflict, because he was like, I really like my job and but at the same time, this is my dream. And I was like, I know it's your dream. We've had the why conversation. If you don't take this job, I'm going to fire you. And he was like, all right, well, that makes it easier. And then on our last day, we had a breakfast together, and I had a little cookie cake made, and on it I said, "You're dead to me." And, but he knew I was joking, because we're still friends to this day. But
when you think about like how connected people are in this world, and if you do what we see in some of these groups, like you fight over the commission check or whatever, that tech that left is still connected to all your team. And the way you do anything is the way you do everything. And so we're training people how to treat us. And we're saying, hey, listen, you can't give 2 weeks notice, because you're going to get the short ride home. So, and so again, this is about accepting the responsibility for the results you have in life. And so, so when you see that, then there's just the basic altruism of it's a it's a way to be a good human. Hey, I thank you for everything. I understand there's nothing personal. You've got your goals. They no longer align with ours. But I also know the industry's a revolving door, and it's a community. We've all had people come back after a while, and we would never do it with expectation of a certain result. We do it because, whenever you do good to another person, you're automatically doing good for yourself because it's just the right thing to do. And then lastly, if you to go back to your original question about like training people to leave, what's good for the hive is good for the bee, right? And so if you look at your community and whether that person goes to a competitor or whatever and educates them on all the things they should do and how they need to raise their prices, and all of a sudden the customers getting better treatment from everybody in the area, you're no longer competing against somebody that doesn't understand their costs or isn't doing things right. And so, there's all kinds of net positive. Clearly at this point, you guys have realized I'm a glass half full guy. And I get that sometimes the glass is cracked and thrown at your head. Totally get it. But what if it wasn't? And so we can't control what others do. We can't control what others think. We can only control ourselves. And so that being said, who do you want to be?
No, that's incredible. I've had Eddie, I know I didn't really talk to you too much before the show, but so I've been HVAC 9 years. Similar to you, I did not come with a lot of trades experience at all. And my wife I can't see her, she's behind my monitor, but I'm sure she's shaking her head like this. He doesn't know what he's doing with a tool in his hand. But came in, and I wish some of these lessons about training, I always knew it was important, but I had no idea where to start. So I used the most experienced guy who was also the crabbiest guy. And caused a lot more problems in 1 hour, 2 hour conversations with other techs that he pissed off that day. But I love your point, because everyone that's left, these guys have all communicated with each other. Even the last company I worked for, we had a guy that left, and one of our techs would just, every once in a while, we just ask him how that guy's doing, because we knew he was texting. And he was getting paid more, or getting this or getting that, and it's like one way to stay connected. I guess for me, and because it comes from my experience of not knowing how to use tools and how to do some of that stuff and starting a training program, if someone's listening to this and either A, they've never started a training program, B, they've started a training program and it's totally flopped, what advice? I'm sure we all have. What advice would you give them, or where would you point them for resources to get started?
So there's some incredible associations, and they have conferences, and there's always some cat like me that's like coming down from the mountaintop with stone tablets full of wisdom, right? We invented training and we did it, right?
Hey Eddie, you want a job here?
But we'll share, so you can come and you can listen. So you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So get around other people that are training or trying to solve the problem that you're working on, right? So, because no one person in the room is as smart as everybody in the room. So get around, engage in groups, Facebook groups, avoid the negativity, focus on the positive. Join an association. So whether it's ACA or something like that, and they'll support you where you need to be. Call people like me. I'm inherently every session I do, I give them my contact number, and about three people out of every 200 will call, and you have to be vulnerable to sort of say what you don't know. But I've taken those calls. So there's a number of different ways you can do it. There's webinars like this. There's research. I think what it comes down to is you got to know yourself. Like, are you a business guy that doesn't really know the tools? Are you a tool guy that doesn't really know the business? Are you a tool guy but doesn't really know how to communicate this stuff? You're like a beautiful mind. You're looking at a condenser. You're like, that's gas, that's liquid, that's hot, cold, right? But you don't know why you know it, right? You're probably not the cat to train. So you got to start with an honest self-assessment of your skills. But the good news is you're surrounded by solutions, because somebody in your group, and this is where I think there's a superpower that is under leveraged by owners and managers, is they think they have to be the guy. So there's this principle that what got you here won't get you there. And at some point we reach the edge of our ignorance, we reach the edge of our skill set, and we hang out there. We set up a tent and we just live there instead of using help. And so what you can do is you can listen. You can keep a parking lot issue that comes up during your meetings off to the side. You can look at your callbacks, your warranties, whatever. You can come up with a list of a dozen things, and you can go to your team. And your team, you can say, hey, you're really good at this. You don't get that. You get a ton of reviews. If I gave you 10 minutes next week, could you just talk us through what you're doing? Right? And so you've got this inherent knowledge of these people that are facing and working on these problems and have skill sets every day. That's one option. Another option, and this is something I used to do when a direct team member would ask to go to training, because techs love training. They would sit because they think you win by knowing the most, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if they don't know 100% of stuff, if they know 99.8% of it, they're not going to bring the subject up, because like I might be an engineer and I'll have to sort of lift my kilt and they'll know that I don't know 0.02% of stuff, right? So so they want to go to training. A paradigm shift is like, okay, I'll go to your training, but here's what I'd like you to do. When is this? This is next. Okay, so the month after that, if I give you 25 minutes, could you just give us an overview of everything you covered? Just the clip notes, whatever. It's a 2-day class, 25. Now, A, you've got a resource. B, that person that's going to training just because he asked and went versus the person that's going knowing he's going to have to give 25. What do you think their engagement, retention?
Oh, yeah.
So
they're taking notes the whole time because they're like,
that's right. All of a sudden they found
their
pencil, right? So and they maybe get excited about sharing because they get to sort of say, look, it's impossible to operate differently than how you see yourself. So if you've seen yourself as just a tech all that time, but now you get 25 minutes to share and help, you get a performance boost because you see yourself differently now. I used to take the this was when I had sales. I was managing a sales team. The last person to get trained, would get a week of the incoming salesperson time. Their calendar was typically lighter, but they've just spent the last, maybe it was 6 months, they've been trained, and they're comparing themselves to all the cats on the team that have been doing this forever. And all they think about is, I'll never know as much as these other people. You give them a week to download the new person, all of a sudden, like, man, I picked up a lot. This is awesome. I'm gonna take this show on the road, right? And all of a sudden they get this performance boost because they see themselves differently, and they've had a paradigm shift inside their head relative to performance. And so there's a lot of different options, but it starts with a ruthless self-assessment of your skills. Knowing your role isn't to know everything. Your role is to build a high-performing team that can function. Remember, the sort of definition of leader isn't how well the team does with you. It's when you go away, does the team still perform? Is it still high-performing? Is it still sharp? Does it function? Do they reach out with solutions to each other? So there's all of these opportunities, if that makes any sense.
So that's helpful for people who come outside the industry, because you hear of this, random accountant that purchases an HVAC company, and then they're like, this guy's gonna, they're gonna run over him because he doesn't know everything, because there's almost a stigma of, if you weren't down in the trenches, you don't earn my respect as a business owner or whatever. But if you can lead that team in training, I mean, obviously you need to start learning a little bit yourself, but at the same time, leading that team.
So we all know accountants and people that had a carpet store before that got into our industry, and they're doing very well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is because they don't have the implicit biases that we all have.
Yes.
Have you ever promoted someone to a service manager, and when someone calls them, his questions are like, well, did you check this? And
exactly.
And instead
gives them the answers.
And it takes 5 times as long, and it costs more, and we haven't built capability in that person. The person that doesn't know says, boy, that's a really good question. What do you think we should do? And now what we've built is agency in the other person. Now, we can still use critical thinking, can be applied across a number of things. You can say, now, have you done that before? You can ask them why they think that. What's your believability factor? All these critical thinking skills that are universally portable. But now that person, that thing that everyone keeps talking about, which is an engaged workforce. How do you get engagement? I need my team to be engaged. What they really mean is, what does agency look like? Everybody, how do you train people and then not have them leave? It's you create agency, and you do that by giving them true agency. And supporting them. Like if they want a technical answer, you can get them a technical answer. But if it's a lot of the times, the same people ask the same question a lot of times, and you've had the same question from the same person, and what you're really seeing is a lack of empowerment, a lack of like, am I okay to just make this decision? Do I need to keep checking in? And so there's all kinds of upsides. And some of the best service managers I know are non-technical.
Very true. Yeah.
They just ask about did you follow the process?
Mm-hmm.
And they rely on process because of they don't know, right? So
is there a point that we're too small to start a training process? I mean, I know that the answer is no, but I mean a formal training process. Because there's a lot of relying on other techs, because you're as a small company, you're juggling everything. You're wearing a million hats,
all the hats,
and at what point do you take a step back and say, hey, look, it's time to implement a training process or program?
I think every formal program I know started as an informal one, and all those steps we talked about of like, hey, I'm going to give you 10 minutes. Some of those people are going to go up and they're going to like sweat like they're like in the headmaster's office, and it's going to be brutal, and they're going to read 3 slides at you like and mess up half the words, and they're just not having a good time. And someone else is going to crush it, and they're going to and you're going to learn stuff, and you're like, man, that was I would never have thought. And so what you're doing is you're finding out who your next trainer is when you do have a formal one, who likes it, who has a natural ability at it. So by all means, look informally. But remember, we also live in a different time than 15, 20 years ago. You've got things like, I was just talking to a team lead yesterday, and he played one of Brian Orr's podcasts about refrigerant. And they stopped it. They stopped it every time Brian asked. It was one where Brian was speaking to his apprentices, and he, every time Brian asked a question, they stopped and they talked about it. And so there's the limitations of having to be the person with all the knowledge. We live in the information age. That's no longer relevant, right? Mm-hmm. So now, what is real, and one of the biggest impediments to training is the idea that urgent versus important. So if you ask everybody, hey, should I have a well-trained workforce? They're going to say yes. But the service phone is going to ring off the hook. And we had a plan.
You're trained good enough. Let's just,
urgent versus important. The important should never be held hostage to the urgent. But that is real, especially on a small team. But even on big teams where the phone just rings more. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's where commitment is doing the thing you said you would do long after the moment has passed. Right. Sort of like think of January 12th at the gym, a little emptier than January 1st. Right. That commitment went the way of your waistband. So and that's just a reality. Right. And so that's why having a cadence, having a muscle memory, having a team that like, hey, you can have someone that you can say, hey, I'm not going to meet and I got to go put out a fire. We were going to talk about this. Do you feel comfortable doing that? And again, it's about building capabilities across your team, because it's not really about you. It shouldn't be.
100%.
I think the one paradigm is what got us there won't get us. And so we got to where we are by having all the answers. So our muscle memory is when we get a question, we answer it, because it's very quick and it's easy and it's efficient.
Guilty.
But what is like? There's 3 R's I train, and if anybody takes away anything from this call, this can be used in meetings, trainings, one-on-ones, whatever. It's 3 R's. So whenever we get a question, we fight that natural hero's urge to be the guy that has the answers.
It's that ego.
It's your ego is not your amigo, as my buddy Jerry says. So in a group of people, you would repeat the question, to make sure that person knows that you got it right, and for others to hear. So what do we do? My customer says they can get this the big box store for cheaper. Okay, did I get that right? Now we all know we've got some. We those phone calls usually end up in our desk, so we've got the answer, but that doesn't really do anything for anybody. So now we redirect. Steve, you've been doing this a long time. What do you say when you get that? Well, I don't know. I usually say this. That's good. Billy, do you do anything different? We talk about how do we get engaging. The unfortunate thing is you create engagement by being engaging. Like you literally have to engage the other person, right?
Oh, crap.
Sunday school rules are in effect. If you don't volunteer, you're going to get voluntold.
You're going to get voluntold, yeah.
Right? So, John, you're quiet. Like, is this all horse hockeys here, or what do you think? And you know, you have again these honest conversations.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, man. You can say all that. I just usually say this. So it's repeat, redirect, and then restate. Your role as not necessarily a trainer, but as a facilitator, you can restate all of these things. Okay, so we heard we're going to do this. We're not going to trash the competition. We're going to point out 3 differences. We're going to talk about, you know, all the costs involved. We're going to talk about our warranty, peace of mind. Did I miss anything? And now, where did that answer come from? It wasn't the stone tablets from the guy in front. It was from their peers. What are they gonna? Who do they most likely to listen to? Right, the guy that trained them 5 years ago, or you, who only cares about getting a bigger bass boat? Right, like that's right. Like that's the paradigm we're dealing with. And as that restate phrase is everything you got was bonkers. You're like, well, those were some good suggestions. Here's what I would suggest. Because you can always say what you were going to say anyway. You just have to wait. Because if you wait, what you'll actually learn is the gap between understanding who's got this, who doesn't. If you get crickets and crazy answers, you're like, oh, note to self, do a training on this next week. And if you get the answers, you can congratulate yourself. You've made them the hero instead of you. They now feel empowered, part of a team, respected for their opinion. They've had the chance to shape the department culture. So it's those 3 R's. It's a muscle memory thing. It's so hard, but it's repeat, redirect it to the people in the room, and then restate.
That's great. You gave me some ideas. Now I don't have an HVAC company anymore, but you gave me some ideas for meetings next week. So good thing Brittany's not down here anymore.
You and Brittany have a meeting.
There's that idea of like leaders speak last. If you speak, you're only repeating what you already know. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's a trap.
Yeah, totally. Eddie, thank you so much. We went over, but we could talk for like 10 hours on this.
Yeah.
And every time I've ever talked to you, it's like, oh, let's not end this conversation. But
hey, happy to come back sometime.
I appreciate that. And anybody that's on this and listening to this, if you haven't already checked it out, join the group, join the Toolshed group. The Schedule Engine Toolshed group. If you're not familiar with Schedule Engine, check out Schedule Engine. It's a great product. If you have any questions about it, obviously ask Eddie or ask myself. I use it. It's on my website. If you go to serviceemperor.com and then you look at the top right, it says schedule online or schedule now. Click those buttons. All those buttons, they're going to go through the Schedule Engine process. Even if you just want to play with it and just hit test, like I'm testing this, just do it. And our office knows, because I have so many friends of mine who want to play with it. So they, I'm just going to stop that conversation. But anyways,
it's very kind. Thank you.
Yeah. If there's anything else, is there anything else that I forgot to ask, Eddie?
No, I'd encourage that the Toolshed isn't about gurus. It's about an intentionally positive community that's elevating the trades. And we need your voice. The trades future is in our hands, and so it takes all of us. So bring your questions, bring your answers, engage, and let's help elevate the trades to what we know they can be.
Absolutely. And huge shout out to Emerson too for supporting that and supporting us. Eddie and I were together last week at Emerson, and they really do make a massive impact in our industry. And I just want to give a huge shout out to them for doing that.
Very cool.
Cool, guys. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank everybody for listening to and watching this episode of Service Business Mastery Podcast. Until we talk again next week, we'll see you later. Be safe.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Service Business Mastery. Now that you are equipped with essential business advice from this impactful conversation, you are one step closer to becoming the successful owner of your dreams. If this episode has been helpful to your business journey, don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a rating, and share it with other owners as well. Visit servicebusinessmastery.com to learn more.